How many of you out there have done an Origin playthrough? I mean, one of the biggest memes about this game is just how long players spent in character creation. But damn, is there a hell of a lot of unique content that I think many players might be missing out on with these ways to play. Nearly every companion we can travel alongside through the Sword Coast has a rich and gripping narrative to experience as just that, a companion. And I think they end up working so well simply because we're not the main character within that experience, leaving us with some of the most emotionally moving or even motivating scenes to witness as their stories play out in glorious fashion. But what if we were the main character? Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy. Today we'll be discussing what makes these Origin playthroughs so unique and enjoyable, while trying to nail down which three are my personal best, as nearly all of them shape the experience through the Sword Coast into something entirely fresh, but I think a specific few of them do it better than the rest. Now, as a heads up, I won't be including the Dark Urge on this list, for the simple reason that the playthrough is an experience only accessible as an Origin, and in turn would just obviously take the #1 spot. So no Dark Urge this time. Please make sure to give the video a like if you enjoy, and don't forget to comment to let me know which Origin playthrough was your favorite. Now I want to nail something out real quick before we just start ranking some of these. What makes a great companion questline doesn't necessarily make an equally engaging Origin playthrough, as the transition from your perspective as Tav to that of the respective Origin character might not carry the same amount of quality in the narrative department, like with Karlach for instance, who, spoiler, didn't make the upcoming list. And it's not because her Origin playthrough is strictly bad. In fact, I wouldn't call any of the Origin playthroughs bad at all. It's because I don't think I can separate her questline's greatness from its backbone, being the bond made with our character, and how it shaped her outlook on her grief. Karlach's story feels like it needs that emotional support character, which is what our Tav was. So if we play through the lens of her perspective instead, her entire conflict feels half-baked. Sure, we can experience an epic redemption story as we travel the Sword Coast in search of the one who sold us to the Archdevil Zariel, but the most enriching features we remember simply aren't there as we take the wheel ourselves. But with Astarion on the other hand, while his questline as a companion is arguably the best amongst them all, his Origin playthrough can certainly stand on its own 2 feet, and even adopt some new elements as we play through the story beats we're likely already familiar with. Now you might be asking, how could Astarion be third? He's literally holding the first place trophy in the thumbnail. Well, I don't know. What's a ranking video if it's all spelt out before you even watch? And if you've watched any of my content before, you know that I typically play as the Pale Elf when making these videos, so I think he deserves center stage in the thumbnail regardless. No, but seriously, I think it's an honor to be included in the top 3 to begin with, as there are some incredibly strong contenders, but there are only so many slots to fill. Right from the first long rest, we get a taste of what it's going to be like to travel the Sword Coast as Astarion himself. Being haunted in his dreams by Cazador, the stage is quickly set for what our primary goal during this particular adventure will be. And it not only frames what to expect from this campaign, but it also retroactively gives you a new perspective on what kind of weight Astarion was truly bearing, and just how his past was coming back to haunt him. But even apart from unique content, just the perspective alone shifts the entire way you look at going about Act 1 and beyond, particularly through the new element of trying to hide your vampirism from the party members around you. In a typical playthrough as Tav, you can uncover his secret through a few different scenarios, be it waking up as he attempts to suck you dry, pause. Or maybe you took note of the boar that had suspicious bite marks and traced the trail back to him as the culprit. But one way or another, it was us trying to reveal his secret. And this time around, there's an entirely new dilemma to face as you maneuver your way through trying to keep the secret yourself instead. I honestly found it pretty thrilling to try and keep it from my companions as long as I could. And it was tough since the game gives you as blatant of an opportunity as it gets during an early long rest where you're a kid in a candy shop looking over your sleeping party members. Or maybe the secret slipped when you encountered the monster hunter near Ethel's hut, which is the only other content specific to Astarion's questline within Act 1. But I will say, as small of an encounter as it is, it had a new feel as Astarion no longer has to ask permission of our player to take action, adding to the thrill of being able to pilot the vampire through this adventure instead of Tav. And that honestly seems to be the most defining factor of this playthrough. Astarion is a character who, while not taking shit from anybody, wasn't without an obvious lack of confidence from his days under Cazador. But now, we get to see him fight his battle in a new way with agency over the narrative, and he isn't just along for the ride and at our quest journal's mercy. This theme also doesn't go away as we enter Act 2 in the Shadow-Cursed Lands, as we'll run into a new cutscene once we go down for a long rest, which is used to relay the presence of our scars instead of us discovering them on his back ourselves in a different playthrough. I'm truly impressed how they went about twisting Astarion's Origin playthrough ever so slightly to include moments that, while small, shape content we have already likely experienced alongside him in a different journey. In fact, as we move through the steps of finding Raphael, dealing with your gear, and learning about our scars, none of it has changed, but it all feels different somehow. If you didn't already love Raphael, you might come around to him here given how involved he is in learning the history of the carvings on our back. We'll likely cling to his every word, and will certainly be incentivized to kill your gear by any means necessary. We were previously able to swipe the opportunity from the Pale Elf if we chose to help the War Devil find the last Dark Justiciar, but there's really only one course of action to take when playing as Astarion, and maybe we could even be a little sadistic in the manner we take care of your gear without any blood on our hands. If I had any guesses, having our attention spread so thin across the countless party members we encounter and bring along through the Sword Coast might have made moments where the various companions took center stage feel a little less impactful. But while that might be true, I don't think that's quite the case here, as Astarion's story was already incredibly gripping, especially during the sequence. So why does it just feel so special to experience this from their lens? That answer will be different for everybody, so let me know what you think in a comment below. For me though, it's how your personal quest in an Origin playthrough is treated almost as a higher priority than that of the main quest in conquering the Absolute. Getting rid of my tadpole? Yeah, whatever, I already did that shit. I want this playthrough to be about me killing Cazador, and that's even how the journal treats it. In each of these Origin experiences, your personal quest will be written in the first perspective as it was when playing as Tav, but it almost feels like we're getting insight on these characters' thoughts that we were never supposed to hear. Each and every story beat will be written in our quest journal as if taken down by Astarion himself, snarky remarks and all. And the controversies within that narrative certainly won't end as we approach Act 3. Now again, a lot of the content to experience once we're in Baldur's Gate is relatively the same. Running into the Gur camp, finding Petrus and Deliria, and having our camp raided all happen as normal. But as mentioned, they have the new properties of however we chose to go about Astarion's story arc. We might have been against our vampirism from the start, or the information we gained from Raphael could have made us interested in trying to swipe the Black Mass ritual for ourselves. This dilemma was also present when Astarion was another member of the party, and I'll be honest, I do think it works better when we have to try and convince him out of his power-hungry desires. Though being in Astarion's shoes with the decision in our hands here, we now have to convince every party member if we want to overthrow the ritual ourselves. And while most of the content certainly is the same, the pacing of approaching the finish line of our personal quest in Cazador's palace does have some changes. Nearly all of the dialogue from now until the end is changed in some way as we converse with the housekeepers and even Godi. To go along with all of this, there are some interesting lines from Astarion as we travel from room to room where he recounts what went on within. And I don't want to ignore what maneuvering through these halls and uncovering the secrets inside is like when playing as one of the 7 vampires that endured so much. There's even some new dialogues to experience when we run across the Gur children and most notably Sebastian deeper in the Defiled Chapel, as we have to succeed in a dice roll in order to recall his name this time around. The entire interaction just takes on a brand new identity. I do wish that there were some unique interactions with the Skull of Velioth though, as I feel like it's a missed opportunity to introduce a last-second glimpse into the cycle of vampire lords, and just how gruesome it can be. Nevertheless, everything we've been through in this adventure has led to this moment as we move to finally approach the man himself, Cazador Szarr. The best part here is that we get to tell him off ourselves, selecting the dialogue options which hold so much weight and emotion behind them. And since we're playing as Astarion this time, they needed a way to make it so solo playthroughs don't instantly game over as you're swept into the ritual. So here we can roll to break Cazador's control over us, and the epic fight we all remember will ensue. And once it's over, a choice that we needed to make for Astarion is now his to choose. Now we all know the big ending to Astarion's character arc is whether he embraces or rejects the potential of becoming the new vampire lord. And it really sticks me with a tough decision to make if somebody were to ask me if I enjoyed Astarion's origin or companion narrative more. There are plenty of unique elements to allow the origin playthrough to stand on its own 2 feet, but it's hard to definitively say whether or not it's better than the other experience. Though Vampire Lord Astarion is not a very fun individual to be around if he's your party member, or even worse, your choice of romance. And while it's not easy to say which playthrough is strictly better for Astarion, the same can't exactly be said for the next entry on this list, as the comparison ends up not being close, but in a good way. Will Ravengard has his fans and certainly has his haters, but one thing I've heard from plenty of you in the comments was that you enjoyed playing through the game piloting the Blade of Frontiers far more than having him along for the journey as a party member. So I had to give it a go for myself, and I came away thinking I just had to make this video to talk about everything I loved. Will is a hero archetype, which is awesome, but also not awesome. His character arc as a party member was honestly rather stale, and while I just recently made a video going over how I thought Act 3 overall redeemed the rest of his false present, there's still Act 1 and 2 to go through, where he really doesn't develop as a character. When he's the main character though, this is a different story. And honestly, if you aren't as interested in investing 3 hours in character creation like those of us with a bit too much time on our hands, I would seriously recommend taking on the Sword Coast as Will instead, for one main reason that empowers the entirety of the playthrough. His dialogue options are almost exactly the same as Tav's. Wait, shouldn't that be a bad thing? I don't think so, as the typical protagonist dialogue options we get as Tav shape so many aspects of Will's origin quest in ways unseen in other playthroughs, and it sort of feels like the ultimate goal to defeat the Absolute and save Baldur's Gate was meant for the boy who was exiled from that very city 7 years prior. The Blade of Frontiers is the champion of the meek and defender of the innocent, and here we have all the agency in the world to either embrace that title with full force or deviate from it when tempted. And Will arguably has the heaviest choice to make the earliest when engaging with his questline, and this time around it even further emphasizes just what kind of playthrough it's going to be as a whole. Everybody's familiar with the decisive moment when we meet Karlach by the river. In this origin playthrough though, we would have had an encounter with Mizora upon an early long rest, shaping our perspective around what choice will be made. Making the decision for him as Tav made the moment feel like, do I want Karlach in my party this playthrough? Or do I want Will to not have horns this playthrough? A moment that feels like it should be our first real introduction to opportunity cost in this game ends up being a purely preference choice. But now, killing Karlach locks us out of one of the most interesting and unique romances to potentially take place in a playthrough. Which, while I said there was no new content, there are of course some unique interactions between characters like him and Karlach, and they provide a whole new outlook on their personal history and grief. Things like Karlach giving Will tips on how to properly maintain his newly grown horns he got as a punishment from Mizora, or just general ways they relate to each other about their involvement with the Hells, make you so much more invested in the complex between these two characters than we were ever allowed to experience beforehand. But there are many factors present within this decision now that weren't present prior, and they make our choice a little tougher. Since remember, we'd be ditching the infernal drip Mizora grants us for slaying the so-called devil, which pieces of armor like this can make playing as the origin character even more enjoyable. Remember the Deathstalker mantle in a Dark Urge playthrough? It gave combat a whole new flavor, so I don't really blame you if you want to lean more into accepting Mizora's wishes and being her good little pup. I mean, I really don't blame you. For no other reason than just the simple fact that you want some overpowered ass armor as the main character. But let's not get sidetracked from what is arguably an even greater objective that has a different light shining on it now that we're playing as Will Ravengard himself, the rescue of his father from the clutches of the Absolute. As I mentioned, the direction for the game's story feels like it lines up for Will perfectly, and what better way for his personal quest to feed off that quality than to make it about saving the very man who exiled us from the city we call home. An individual like Counselor Floric, who felt like she was always talking past us and to our companion Will, is now one of the core contributors towards our ultimate goal of saving our father. It was just so interesting to me how within Act 1, without much work done to add new instances to the journey, the game was able to take advantage of who we were playing as. Simple aspects like how the narrator addresses us as opposed to Tav, and how some of the most important characters see us throughout, do so much of the heavy lifting to where I don't even think I cared that the only unique scene was the one during our first long rest. In moving into Act 2 though, I'll admit the feeling of playing as Will takes a back seat for a bit, which in my eyes ends up being the biggest blemish on this playthrough. But while the interaction with Floric here at the Last Light Inn feels a bit underwhelming compared to when we met at Joaquin's Rest, I do have to say this felt infinitely worse when Will was our companion. And with how involved we already feel so far in the story with Will as the main character, the lull in content doesn't even feel too negatively impactful. And it's even made up for once we reach Moonrise Towers, where our loyalty or defiance against our patron is brought to the forefront yet again. In a different playthrough, we might have listened and thought, yeah, blah blah Avernus, blah blah Zariel, blah blah good little pup, alright, I've got a meeting with Ketheric Thorm to get to. But Mizora's dialogue this time around was almost hypnotizing to listen to the more I heard from her, and she'll only stay at the forefront of our minds here on out as we trend towards one of the most climactic sequences for Will, which again is empowered more by the origin we're a part of. We might already know what Zariel's asset is from a different playthrough, but once we make the trek through the majority of Act 2 and end up in the Mind Flayer colony, we'll get to see just what this interaction was like from the perspective of our favorite warlock. And similarly to the scenario in Joaquin's Rest with Counselor Floric, an interaction where Will was typically being spoken to past us but we had all the control over, now feels like it can properly play out with Will himself negotiating his pact to end in 6 months' time, and we even have to roll for it this time. And convincing her to give us the Infernal Rapier was just the cherry on top that makes us feel rewarded for our choices as Will in dialogue. But this isn't even the biggest moment in Act 2 for Will. Nope, that comes at the core of the Mind Flayer colony where we meet not only Ketheric Thorm once again, but also Orin and Gortash, who have some plans for the Duke. It's interesting to hear the narrator speak through Will's thoughts as we witness Alder become victim to an illithid tadpole, as we really only got a brief "oh no" from him before. It really pitches this moment to us as deeply hopeless instead of something that just kind of happens. I originally thought Orton's involvement was so cool that I was barely affected by who she was infecting, but here it feels that our two main quest objectives are conjoining into one complex plotline, and it makes this arguably the most climactic moment for Will's character entirely. Though once we defeat the Avatar of Merkel and claim Ketherick's Netherstone, the most decisive moments are yet to come as we pass into Act 3. We'll certainly add dialogue options to entertain once we arrive at Baldur's Gate as a companion, but again, until his most critical character development deeper into Act 3, I wasn't too attached to him and sort of shrugged off what he had to say as it felt like exactly what I would have expected out of him. With his personal quest being so much more relevant in our minds as we approach the city here and now though, the homecoming element is in full force. So when we have to sit through Gortash's coronation, knowing full well the man we've been trying to save is doing this all against his will, or take part in the subsequent make or break decision with Mizora, it's almost entirely new content even though nothing is different. Nothing but a simple change of perspective, and no other scene I think embodies that change better than reconciling with or refusing to forgive the Duke if we chose to rescue him. The conversation is just strictly better here than when Will was a companion. Once more, no longer is a character important to Will's story simply talking past us and to him, with us having the ultimate choice over the dialogue. Instead, we get a direct one-on-one with the man responsible for the despair our character faced into his young adult years. But while this is what our personal quest has been ultimately leading up to, there is one more quest objective we'll be sent on as a quote champion of Baldur's Gate. The Wormway is already one of my favorite sequences in the entire game, and embarking to awaken on Sur while playing as Will honestly put that little cherry on top. Though this area more than any other is where I would have liked to see some inclusion of unique content, since I just see so much potential to make these trials feel even more grand in scale. Regardless, it's a fresh perspective if nothing else, and once complete will give us a final dialogue with our father, where he relinquishes all ego and allows his son to make the most rewarding decision of his adventure. Do we contribute towards Baldur's Gate once all is said and done with the Absolute as the new Duke of the city, or do we establish ourselves as the Blade of Frontiers, or maybe even the Blade of Avernus? The decision feels infinitely more conclusive to our journey as a whole and all of the choices we've made. And maybe we can even cap it all off with a special moment with Mizora if we were a really good pup. Now, who could possibly take the #1 spot? It's Shadowheart. It's Shadowheart. I know the previous two entries benefited from a new perspective on a character we've previously grown so attached to, where certain moments, while not strictly new in content, achieved a sense of immersion that made them feel entirely new despite it. But here with our favorite little cleric of Shar, there certainly is an abundance of unique content to combine with everything that made Will and Astarion's origins so amazing. And I know I said the game feels like it was made to be taken on by the Blade of Frontiers, but Larian clearly put a far greater effort into adding bits and pieces to Shadowheart's origin experience that would leave the player feeling like she's the real main character of Baldur's Gate 3, apart from, the actual main character. And it starts from the very beginning. While nearly every playthrough leaves you to your own devices right after you're ejected from your Mind Flayer pod, Shadowheart's possession of the Astral Prism is given its own introduction, which honestly gives escaping the ship a new priority apart from strictly survival. We have a task to protect this thing from the very start. Character complexities are thrown at you right away too, as the first potential companion we're introduced to is Lae'zel, who's notorious for not being admired by the cleric. And she might even be perceived as a threat if we know that the Astral Prism is a Githyanki artifact from a previous playthrough. So maybe we just... Well, we do know how this dilemma pans out if unattended, which immediately gives us a moment of pause as to just how we're going to go about our relationship with the Githyanki. But it's not only interactions with the other characters that give us a fresh experience through the Sword Coast. Shadowheart herself has a similar element to Act 1 as Astarion, where you're forced to choose how you go about either revealing or secreting away the aspect of your character that might rub others the wrong way. Astarion with his vampirism, and Shadowheart with her devotion to the goddess of loss, Shar. Though here, it's a bit different. We've had our memories wiped, and our character is influenced from the deity that many see as evil. Above all, our goal is to escort the Astral Prism to Baldur's Gate per Shar's wishes, and making sure nobody crosses us because of our devotion is certainly part of that. And can I just say that it's such an amazing experience to witness firsthand just what was going on in the mind of Shadowheart. It honestly took me a while to appreciate her as a companion because she was just honestly kind of a bitch, and I just didn't want to deal with it. But even after learning all about her troubled past, it took me until playing this origin playthrough to truly realize how it affected her in Act 1. though there is the ominous wound on her hand that this time around won't require us to break through her tough exterior as her companion to gain some notable insight on what it means for her. It will cause us pain on various occasions, but each moment comes with a memory that's described through narration, almost making us want to reveal our secrets to the party in hopes of hearing what they might have to say about what is plaguing our character. Now, Act 1 is a great introduction into what sort of complexities are going to affect our playthrough as Shadowheart, but nothing can really prepare you for how immersive of a journey Act 2 feels. The confrontation of Isabel as a cleric of the opposite worship, getting her childhood flashback regardless of your relationship with the character as Tav, the Gauntlet of Shar as an aspiring Dark Justiciar, and god damn, immunity to the Shadow Curse! Well, you do still need to find a way around the plague for the rest of your party. But solo players rejoice, you don't need to deal with the most frustrating part of the second act. Okay, point is, there's a lot here that makes Shadowheart's origin playthrough truly come to life as soon as we make it out of either the Mountain Pass or the Underdark. I went with the Underdark, and it definitely feels like I made the right choice, since it, along with the Grimforge, gives a great introduction into the history of Dark Justiciars, making the closing portions of Act 1 an incredible prologue to what is likely the peak of this entire adventure. Since we need a way around the Shadow Curse, the Last Light Inn is typically our first stop in most playthroughs, and in a playthrough where we embrace Shar a bit more, our meeting with Isabel Thorm on the second floor balcony might carry a bit of a showdown element to it. We're both clerics, but worship gods that could not be more at odds. So maybe Flaming Fist Marcus can go right ahead and take her back to have a sweet old meeting with her father, who he himself has a new perspective to experience since he was once a legendary Dark Justiciar. Regardless, however we acquire protection for our party from the Shadow Curse, the juiciest content for Shadowheart comes deeper in the region, and perhaps we took a long rest along the way, which would have given us a flashback into Shadowheart's childhood in a much more timely and convenient manner, since when she was a companion, this scene would have only opened up when you gained enough approval with her. And I'll say it yet again, being the central plot point to the story being told enhances the scene even more than the bond we had potentially made with the character could have done, doing a great job of staging the next portion of her journey as the road leads us straight to the Gauntlet of Shar. This part of the experience alone is why I felt like I needed to give her the #1 spot. The Gauntlet of Shar was already a colossal venture of epic proportions. You could even rest at camp throughout its corridors, making it clear that once you entered the gloomy dungeon, you weren't turning back around for some time. So it gave opportunities for Astarion and even Shadowheart's narratives to push forward as party members, and I'd argue by this point in the game is where the deepest bonds with our companions are made. But it was always information being told to us either through digging and dialogue or revealed to us in critical moments. This time through the Gauntlet of Shar and subsequently the Shadowfell though, we have Shar in direct contact with us, which gives an insider perspective on all the potent assaults on Shadowheart's mind at the hands of the Goddess of Loss. All that is driving her to slay the Night Song and become a Dark Justiciar, and more importantly, what is continuing to stifle any memories from surfacing in her mind, is now just here in the open, and is certainly invaluable in how much more it fleshes out the Gauntlet of Shar as a narrative experience. And Shar's way with words is no joke. I planned the whole time to do this playthrough as a Shadowheart that entirely rejected her devotion to Shar. Through acquiring memories and gaining a new perspective, she would learn that there was no benefit to worshipping the Goddess of Loss. But damn, being sweet-talked into being Shar's good little cleric though through the sequence is a seriously difficult concept to deny, since she phrases everything that clearly has unreasonable intentions as something honorable.
This is my sacred proving ground. This is where you shall show me just how much you love me. Then I can embrace you, elevate you, reveal you to your true purpose. Like the Dark Justiciars of old, you must journey to my innermost sanctum and make a sacrifice in my name. You will become my voice made flesh.
Eventually culminating into a trip into the Shadowfell where the stakes are higher than ever before. And can I talk about how much more I enjoyed the presence of Dame Aelin through Shadowheart's origin? I mean, this is my video, so I can do whatever the hell I want. She was already badass, donning the craziest armor I've ever seen. I'm a complete sucker for paladins. But unless we dealt with Lorroakin in Baldur's Gate later on, the rest of her relevance in the story felt extremely underwhelming. And I know, graduating to Dark Justiciar status is super cool, we get a sick spear and can fully embrace the edginess of our character with full force, but I personally feel that unless it's for RP reasons, you'd be missing out on one of the most surprising relationships to develop as we move towards Act 3. Since if we choose to deny Shar's wishes and spare Seluna's daughter, she'll enlighten us about an unknown backstory to our character, which leads to some of the strongest character development I've seen in the entire game. It's not without punishment though, as yet another unique experience plays out where we're scolded by our prior patron deity, emphasizing that our choices have serious consequences, or rewards, had we slain Dame Aelin. Regardless of our direction in the main plot, as we move towards Baldur's Gate knowing that our parents are the next quest objective, the excitement that was brewing my entire way there was something I'll never forget. Shadowheart may not be as relevant to the city of Baldur's Gate as a character like Will is, so our interactions with Gortash, for example, don't mean much more than they did with any other character. But I personally had a tunnel vision where almost nothing else mattered but finding and resolving the conflict with either our betrayal or dedication towards Shar's cult following in the city. We might be approaching with glistening silver hair and the backing of a Selûnite paladin behind us to couple with all of the motivation to save our parents, or we might just be approaching our birthright as relayed to us by Mother Shar and the woman haunting our latent memories. This playthrough also fixes a nitpicky issue I had with the original way the upcoming sequence played out within the House of Grief. When Shadowheart is meant to face judgment at the hands of Mother Viconia, we will take her place sitting down to start the scenario. And we could even just deny her the right to sit down at her very own moment. But now we are Shadowheart, and the entire sequence feels so much more natural. We're guided to sit down, and there's no immersion broken for the sake of switching places with the cleric. Now everything from here on out is our choice to make. Reject Shar and free our parents? The fight in the Sanctum Prior might be a little bit more difficult, but this feels like the most honorable decision. Our faith will be rewarded with a chance to persuade Viconia's forces against her, but to complete our story arc, we'll need to sacrifice the two people we were forced to brutally torture, which we only now learn their relevance to our origin. And whatever we choose, we'll be taking the final steps towards conquering the Absolute in devotion to one of the two most notable deities you'll ever hear of in Faerûn. Shadowheart above all the other options just feels like the end result is the most derivative of how you approach the rest of the playthrough up to this point. But even though she might be the best in my opinion out of the bunch, her standout origin features are seen across nearly all the characters to pick from. It's clear that enjoying their personalities as companions isn't all there is when it comes to understanding what makes them tick. Special interactions within these origin playthroughs really just give it that extra bit of both context and perspective that create an entirely new understanding of their masterful writing. Which origin playthrough is your favorite? Make sure to let me know in the comments. These are all just my thoughts on the topic, so I'd love to hear what you guys enjoyed the most. Thanks for watching, and keep figuring out fantasy.